right hand, please, sir. Do you swear or affirm to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God?
I do.
You may have a seat. All right, Mr. Truman.
Thank you, Your Honor. Tell us your name, please.
My name is Joseph Stevens, and my last name is spelled Stephenes.
And are you employed?
Yes, I currently work at the FBI laboratory in Quantico, Virginia, FBI being the Federal Bureau of Investigation.
And do you have a job title?
I do. I'm a chemist, forensic examiner at the lab there in the chemistry unit.
And what's your primary duties as a chemist for the FBI?
My primary duties are to receive evidence from contributors. Those contributors can be state, local, or federal partners. We receive that evidence through our evidence management unit, and that's passed up to the individual units such as myself.
No, I hate to interrupt, but could Mr. Stevens slow down just a little bit? I'm having a little trouble following his testimony.
All right. And perhaps you can scoot up a little bit towards the microphone and slow down just a little bit, Mr. Stevens.
Thank you.
Thank you. Go ahead, Mr. Truman.
Go ahead, Mr. Stevens.
So we receive evidence from our evidence management unit. It comes up to our chemistry unit where it's assigned to an examiner, such as myself. I then intake that evidence, check it in, determine what kind of evidence I have, what kind of analyses I need to do. And then I process that evidence and I issue a report. This will be a forensic report or a laboratory report. And then as needed, I testify to those observations and findings that I made.
How long have you worked for the FBI?
I started working at the FBI in April of 2016, so I've been there for a little more than 8 years.
And you started as a forensic chemist, and that's what you do now?
That is correct.
And, what kind of experience did you have before you went to work for the FBI as a forensic chemist?
Before the FBI, I worked at the United States Secret Service in Washington, D.C. They have a forensic document laboratory. There I performed instrumental analysis on inks, papers, and toners, and I did that for about 10 years. I started there in December of 2005 through April of 2016.
Would you please share with us your educational background?
I earned a Bachelor of Science in Chemistry from Roanoke College in Virginia. After that, I attended Texas A&M University in College Station, Texas. I did not earn a degree from that, but I transferred to the George Washington University, where I earned a Master of Science in Forensic Science in 2007.
Did you receive any specialized training in forensic chemistry?
Yes. So as part of my training at the United States Secret Service, I completed a 2-year training program there. And upon my arrival at the Federal Bureau of Investigation, I completed another 2-year training program there as well.
In this particular case, do you have any specialized training that would qualify you to determine an analysis that would result in a finding of insulin?
Yes. So as part of our 2-year training program at the FBI, I conducted practicals, which I work with insulin, putting it on my instrumentation and analyzing it. And then I'm eventually given what's known as a competency test to ensure that I know how to perform the analysis. And I successfully completed that competency test. And then there's also other components of that training, such as oral boards, where a panel of my peers evaluate my knowledge on topics.
Your Honor, at this point, the state, subject to defense inquiry, moves that the witness be treated under 702 as an expert.
If you wish to engage in voir dire, Mr. Selden.
No, Your Honor.
Is there any objection to the state's request?
No, Your Honor.
This witness will be regarded as an expert in his described field.
Yeah, this marked as states 9 and 10, please.
9 and 10, Your Honor.
Thank you.
is a box and a lid. Approach the witness, sir.
Yes, you may.
Thank you. Stevens, I hand you what's been marked at this point as for identification as States 9, and feel free to open the envelope and review it. You familiar with that?
Yes, I am.
Before we get to that point, how is it that States 9 came into your possession?
This case came in through our Pittsburgh field office, which is the field office responsible for this area. So it came in as a case submission through Pittsburgh.
And what were you asked to examine, not only this, but the rest of the documents, the items we're going to review with you? What were you asked to examine them for?
I was submitted 4 items. One of them was a box, and 3 of them were vials containing unknown substances or unknown liquids. I was asked to analyze the unknown liquids within those vials.
And there's another item in that package, correct?
Yes, there is.
You got 10. Stick with 10. I'm gonna have to do it on- I'll just put it on the individual. You've got a package in there. I'll bring it back to you. If you could put, probably the easiest way to do it, how do you want to handle the bottle? You can put it right on everything. Okay. Yeah, that's anywhere. Bottom's fine, that's good. And what's been marked for identification is States 10. You identify that, sir?
The item states exhibit number 10 is a vial of methylprednisolone acetate that I received in the lab.
Let's go ahead and get all the exhibits in front of you.
Your Honor, I'm going to object to that answer in that we have not established what was in the vial. The only thing that can be testified to at this junction is that it is a vial with a label marked methylprednisolone acetate.
Seriously? That's your objection?
I think that's where we are in the process, and hopefully we'll find out more. I'm going to overrule the objection.
Okay. Have this marked as 11, please.
Number 11, Your Honor.
Very well.
Done. Approach the witness, please.
Yes, you may.
Thank you. Hand you what's been marked for identification as States 11. Ask you to identify that.
Do you happen to have a pair of scissors? This is still sealed.
This is the one with scissors. Okay. Don't run with those.
Thank you.
Can you identify that, sir?
This is a vial of dried material now was labeled in the lab as item 2-1, but it states exhibit number 11 that I generated as a result of my analysis.
Okay.
I'm sorry, I didn't understand any of that. What was that vial?
Thought you didn't want him to answer that.
I don't think we've gotten to that point yet.
No.
I'm going to
His
overrule the
identification,
objection.
I couldn't understand what he was classifying that as. I'm just asking him to repeat it a little slower if possible.
So this item was the liquid contents removed by me from state's exhibit number 10.
Thank you.
If I could have this marked as states 12, please.
Very well.
Of course I will. Maybe. Yeah, approach the witness, please.
Yes, you may.
Thank you. Thank you, Your Honor.
Thank you.
And what's been marked for identification is states 12. Ask you to take a look at that.
This is a bottle that's labeled as enclomiphene citrate that I received in the lab.
Put it back in the bag if you want to. Because of the number, which one of these do you want? 13. Your Honor, if I could have State's Exhibit 13 marked here, please.
Okay.
This is number 13, Your Honor.
Thank you.
Thank you. Stevens, I hand you what's been marked for identification as States 13 and ask you to take a look at that, please. Do you recognize that?
Yes, this is the liquid that I removed from state's exhibit 12.
Okay. Oops. I could have this 14, please.
This is number 14, Your Honor.
Very well.
Once again, if I could approach the witness, please, Your Honor.
Yes.
Hand you what's been marked for identification as States 14. What's a little sticker? Oh, right there. Okay. have, I believe, with you number 15.
It's 14.
Right, but he's also got 15. Do we need a separate?
15 needs to be marked, is that right, Mr. Truman?
It does, Your Honor. Thank you.
This is 15, Your Honor.
Very well.
And Your Honor, I'll hand this to the witness if that's acceptable.
Yes.
Thank you. Hand you what's been marked for identification as states 15. Recognize that.
Yes, that's the liquid contents I removed from State's Exhibit 14.
Mr. Stevens, explain to us the procedure that when you received this, what did you do with these items?
The first thing I did is administrative, it's called a check-in,
Okay.
where I analyzed, where I visually inspect these and see what kind of things I received. So the first thing I noticed was the box, which is State's Exhibit 9. The next thing was the first vial that I came across, State's Exhibit 10. And the contents of that, which have been labeled as State's Exhibit 11. I got another vial, State's Exhibit 12. The contents of that vial, State's Exhibit 13. And a third vial, and its liquid contents. So I had 3 vials, and then of those 3 liquids that were generated. And I just took inventory of what I had, what the bottles were labeled as, what markings they might have had on them, what lot information they had. If they had a manufacturer, what was that manufacturer? So that visual examination was first.
I think I failed to ask you to identify 14.
State's Exhibit 14 is a vial that's labeled as Humalog Insulin List Pro. 10 milliliters, 100 units per milliliter.
In summary fashion, tell us what you did to perform your analysis.
So each of these items goes through a standard operating procedure or a technical procedure where we analyze them. We use scientific instruments to analyze them. We compare them to references where practical, and then we determine the results of those analyses.
Take a look at 10, please. What was your analysis of that?
So for State's Exhibit 10, I determined that State's Exhibit 10, the vial labeled methylprednisolone acetate, and the liquid that came out of it, State's Exhibit 11, is the one I actually tested.
Explain that to us, please.
So State's Exhibit 10 is the physical vial. State's Exhibit 11 was the liquid recovered from that vial, the liquid that came out of this vial. So my analysis was on the liquid.
Okay. Now, the State's 11, that was lab material. You have a inventory of bottles that you use for your analysis. Is that what that is?
We have libraries and reference materials that we use, yes.
Okay, but the actual container itself, I mean, did that come with the information that came to you, or was that just some kind of testing process that you used?
I'm not sure I understand.
Well, as I understood what your testimony was, you analyzed the contents of number 10 by putting it into 11.
I didn't analyze the contents of 10, the vial. I transferred those contents to State's Exhibit 11.
That's, okay.
And then I analyzed State's Exhibit 11. So,
We're on the same page now, I think. Go ahead and explain what you did.
so visual examination on 10, what were the labels and markings on the bottle, then chemical analysis on the liquid that was within this bottle.
And again, in summary fashion, what did you do to analyze State's 11?
State's Exhibit 11 was subjected to 3 different other kinds of testing. They're all scientific instrumentation. One of them is known as Fourier transform infrared spectroscopy. The next one, gas chromatography, mass spectrometry. And the final one, we call DART-TOF-MS, which stands for Direct Analysis in Real Time, Time of Flight Mass Spectrometry. All of these are very expensive, complicated instruments. Their primary goal is to determine the chemical composition of the materials within a liquid or a solid.
What's the number of that one? What's the number of that one?
10, 11, 12.
Okay. Go ahead and talk about 12,
Yes.
please. What was number 12?
12 was a vial labeled enclomiphene citrate, 30 milliliters, and on that vial it says for research purposes only, not for human consumption. That was the vial. This vial generated States Exhibit 13, which is the liquid that came out of that vial.
And so you actually performed your examination on States 13, is that correct?
Yes, that is correct.
And tell us again in summary fashion, what did you do with States 13?
States Exhibit 13 was subjected to the same analytical scheme as States Exhibit 11, Fourier transform infrared spectroscopy, or FTIR, gas chromatography, mass spectrometry, GCMS, and DART-TOF MS, direct analysis in real time, time-of-flight mass spectrometry.
And this one's 14? And 14, what did you do with States 14 when you received it?
So visually examined it, determined that it was labeled insulin, Lispro, and Humalog, and then separated the content into a new vial, States Exhibit 15, the liquid, and analyzed the liquid.
And that's the analysis you conducted on States 15?
That is correct.
Was your analysis such that you could conclude what was contained in those bottles that you received?
Yes.
And what conclusions did you reach?
For the vial that was labeled methylprednisolone acetate and the liquid that was tested, States Exhibit 11, is my determination that that States Exhibit 11 was consistent with containing methylprednisolone acetate. In other words, the chemical that is on the vial, it was consistent with containing the chemical labeled on the vial.
And I forgot the number, but the next one you analyzed.
States Exhibit 12, the bottle labeled enclomiphene citrate, was my conclusion that the liquid that came out of that, States Exhibit 13, was consistent with containing glycerol and letrozole. I'll remind you that the bottle is labeled enclomiphene citrate, so it was not what was labeled on the bottle.
The stuff according to the label was not the stuff you found.
That is correct.
And last, the next exhibit.
This was States Exhibit 14, the vial labeled Humalog insulin Lispro, is my conclusion that is consistent with containing human insulin or Humalog.
From the information provided, you took a number of photographs of the items that you've been reviewing with the jury today, correct?
Yes.
Could I have that smart, please?
State Exhibit number 16, Your Honor.
Okay.
Oops, excuse me. Ran out of arm. Stephen, on States Exhibit 16 for identification, You took that photograph?
Yes, I did.
What are we looking at? Oh, thank you.
These are photographs that I took of the State's Exhibit 9 as received in the laboratory.
And that's the box.
That is correct.
And what's that?
That is another picture of State's Exhibit 9.
You also took that photograph?
I did.
And what is that depicting?
This is State's Exhibit 10 as received, which at the time contained State's Exhibit 11, the liquid.
The next photograph you took, what's the significance of the plastic cover?
This plastic cover is used as a tamper-evident control so that when the septum that would be expected to be underneath there, and in this case there's a septum, a rubber material that's in the center, couldn't be inadvertently punctured.
Had there been any tampering of the exhibit by the time that you received it?
When I visually inspected it and tried to remove that, the force that I was using, which I described as a moderate force, was insufficient to remove that, implying to me that it was probably intact.
And the next photograph.
These are pictures that I took of State's Exhibit 12 with the liquid being inside State's Exhibit 13.
And the next one.
These are pictures I took of State's Exhibit 14 with the liquid being inside State's Exhibit 15.
The last photograph.
These are close-ups of State's Exhibit 14, the vial.
At the conclusion of your study of all of these exhibits, did you write a report of your findings?
I did.
If I could have this last exhibit, Mark, please.
State's Exhibit number 17, Your Honor.
Thank you.
Let me give you that one, and I'll trade you that one. Thank you. And what's been marked for dedication as State 17? You recognize that?
I do. This is the report I issued dated July 20th, 2021.
And could you share with us your conclusions that you embodied in that report, please?
So the conclusions that are embodied in this report are that State's Exhibit 11, the liquid from the methylprednisolone labeled bottle, were consistent with containing methylprednisolone acetate, which is the chemical that was labeled on the bottle, State's Exhibit 10. State's Exhibit 12, the liquid that came out of there, State's Exhibit 13, is consistent with containing letrozole and glycerol. Those are not the chemicals labeled on the bottle. The bottle is labeled as enclomiphene citrate. And State's Exhibit 14, the bottle labeled Humalog Insulin Lispro. And the contents, State's Exhibit 15. State's Exhibit 15, the liquid, is consistent with containing human insulin / Humalog.
Stevens, what was your report that you have in front of you and you've just reviewed with us, was that the only report you wrote in this case?
It was.
Has anything been brought to your attention since you conducted your study and wrote your report that would cause you to change your mind?
No.
Your Honor, at this point, the state moves 9 through 17 into evidence.
Any objection, Mr. Selden?
No, Your Honor.
All right, State's Exhibits 9 through 17 are admitted into evidence.
Stevens, focusing on the insulin, is there a way to determine difference between insulin and insulin, I'm not sure how, Lispro, is that how it's pronounced?
There is human insulin, which is generated in the human body, and then there's human insulin, and there's insulin Lispro. Lispro is what we call an isomer, the same chemical formula, manufactured in a lab with a subtle difference, a change in order of the blocks that build it. So there is differences in the chemical structure, but our techniques will not tell them apart. So that's why the report says it's consistent with containing human insulin / Humalog. Humalog is the brand name for for insulin Lispro.
What's the intention or what's the use of insulin that you found in your lab?
Insulin is used to regulate blood sugar.
Could I have just a moment, please?
Yes, you may.
Now, you didn't make any opinion or suggest any conclusion as to the contents in terms of volume of any of those vials, did you?
I did not.
Why not?
Our technical procedures don't have that as part of our routine analysis, and reporting measurements of significance, such as the volume of a vial, is not something our lab does.
That's all the questions the state has, Your Honor. Thank you.
All right. Let's take our mid-morning break at this time. Ladies and gentlemen, we'll break for about 10 minutes. Enjoy the delicious donut. Are there any matters that we need to take up out of the presence of the jury at this time, Mr. Truman?
Thank you.
Anything, Mr. Selden? Very well. Bring in the jury, please. We continue with cross-examination of the witness, please. Mr. Selden.
Thank you, Your Honor. Mr. Stevens, my name is Stanley Selden. I'm co-counsel for the defense for Natalie Cochran. Good morning. I would like to ask you, you have testified in other trials before, have you not?
I have.
And in all of those trials, you testified for the prosecution or the state, isn't that correct?
I believe that is correct, yes.
And in this case, you were asked by the prosecution and the state to testify more or less on their behalf as to the substances submitted for your analysis. Isn't that correct?
I was asked to testify to the report I had previously issued. So yes, that happened to be for the state in this case.
Right. I'd like to ask you a few questions about your education and training, not so much to qualify you as an expert, which has already been done, but just general knowledge,
Sure.
okay? Yep. In the course of your education, did you have any courses in toxicology?
Yes, I did. I had one course in graduate school.
And toxicology is the study of toxins or poisons in the body. Would that be a fair summary?
Yes.
Did you have courses in biochemistry and organic chemistry?
Yes, in undergrad, I had courses in both.
And would you tell briefly what biochemistry is?
Biochemistry, as I learned it in undergrad, is the interaction of human biology with chemistry. So materials that go into and out of your body.
Right. So you have some knowledge of how chemicals introduced in the body react in the body. Would that be a fair statement?
No, that's actually outside the scope of my expertise at the FBI.
But you have some knowledge through research, especially in the case of Humalog, correct?
As part of the training, yes, I have some foundational understanding of what insulin is, but not how it interacts with the body.
Okay. Were you aware or were you informed that the substances provided to you for analysis, especially the Humalog and the methylprednisolone, were recovered from the home of Natalie Cochran, which was 433 4H Lake Road?
Yes, that probably would have been on the incoming description of evidence provided.
Okay. And were you aware or were you told that those items were recovered pursuant to a search of 433 4H Lake Road by police officers and other investigating officers?
I don't recall, no, I don't recall being told that. I mean, obviously they were obtained and I was provided information from where they were obtained, but not how they were obtained.
But they were obtained by the state and then subsequently provided to you, correct?
I assume so, yes.
I submit to you that Michael Cochran died around February 11th of 2019. These substances were not provided to you until June of 2021. Isn't that correct?
They were recovered in the field office sooner than that, but they arrived in my unit in, I believe it was May of 2021.
Okay.
And I started the analysis in June of 2021.
So over 2 years subsequent to the death of Michael Cochran. Wouldn't that be a fair statement?
When
If he
did you
passed away in February of 2019.
Correct.
I submit to you that these substances were collected approximately 4 months to 5 months after the death of Michael Cochran in February of 2019. Do you know what was done with these, where they were, how they were stored prior to you receiving them approximately 2 years later?
No, I do not.
Now, I would like to discuss states 10 and 11. And 10 was a vial marked methylprednisolone acetate. Do you recall that?
Yes.
And your report states, and it's also confirmed, that that particular item was found in a cabinet in the corner of the home of the
Your Honor,
Cochrans.
He's already indicated he doesn't know any of this stuff.
I think that's correct. The court will sustain the objection.
But this was recovered at 433 4H Lake Road.
Sustained,
Just-
please, Mr.
Thank you.
Selden.
Okay. Methylprednisolone acetate is a synthetic corticosteroid, correct?
Yes, that is correct.
A form of steroids in general, right?
The use that I researched and came across was an anti-inflammatory,
All right.
not a corticosteroid, an anabolic steroid for growing muscle tissue.
And that leads me to my next question, which is methylprednisolone acetate suppresses inflammation, right?
Correct.
Now, I submit to you that if Natalie Cochran had inflammation of the lungs, would it be a proper use of methylprednisolone acetate to aid in suppressing that inflammation of the lungs?
That is a question that would be answered by a doctor that's outside of my area of expertise.
Well, methylprednisolone acetate suppresses inflammation, right?
Objection. The witness has indicated it's beyond his area of expertise. It's beyond his area of expertise.
I think that says it all. The court is constrained to sustain the objection.
Okay. Can steroids increase blood sugar?
Again, that's not an area I'm an expert in. The interaction of steroids with the human body would be an endocrinologist or potentially a toxicologist or an MD, a doctor.
Okay. Do you know if an overdose of methylprednisolone acetate is life-threatening or not?
I do not know.
Okay. I'd like to move on to states 12 and 13. That was identified as a vial marked enclophamine citrate. Is that correct?
Yes, that is correct.
And that particular substance, according to your report, came from 211 Old Grandview Road, which was not the Cochran residence. Isn't it correct as to where it was recovered from?
Your Honor, may I refer to the report? States Exhibit
Certainly.
17? So that is not listed in the report. Excuse me, yes it is. States Exhibit 12 was recovered from 211 Old Grandview.
Thank you. Which, of course, is not the same as 433 4H Lake Road, right?
Correct.
Now, your extensive analysis showed that it didn't contain enclophamine citrate. It contained glycerol and letrozole, correct?
Correct.
So it was mismarked, misidentified, right?
The label on States Exhibit 12 did not match the contents of the liquid States Exhibit 13. That's correct.
Fine. If I submit to you that withdraw that, I'm not going to ask that question. I'd like to move on to states 14 and 15. That was marked as Humalog insulin Lispro. Is that correct?
Yes, States Exhibit, the vial, States Exhibit 14 was marked that.
And you testified that you have specialized knowledge, research, etc., into Humalog insulin and its effects and your research. Is that correct?
I believe I testified that I have the expertise to analyze those and determine whether or not something contains that or is consistent with containing those materials, not their effects on the human body.
Insulin, in general, well, there are different classifications of insulin. There's insulin produced by the pancreas of the body, which is produced internally by the body, correct?
Correct.
Then you have insulin, which is manufactured. You have Humalog Lispro, and you have a couple of other brands of insulin. Isn't that correct?
Yes, that is correct.
You have essentially two different kinds of synthetic insulin. You have fast-acting insulin, which Humalog Lispro is a member of, and you have the slower, longer-acting types of insulin, correct?
Correct.
Humalog Lispro insulin is termed fast-acting because its effects take approximately 15 minutes to work, correct?
My research said 15 to 30 minutes, but yes, it's fast acting in that it is ready, available insulin. Yes.
And its workings or effect is to essentially reduce blood sugar, right?
The marketed purpose of insulin is to regulate blood sugar. Its effects in the body on any given injection would be something best answered by an endocrinologist or a doctor.
But you said you have specialized knowledge of insulin, right?
Correct? Yes.
Okay. Now, insulin, from your understanding of it, doesn't just wham, it takes effect and that's it. Humalog Lispro insulin works over 3 to 4 hours. Isn't that right?
Again, that's a question best answered by an endocrinologist or doctor. My expertise is in the analysis of the chemistry of insulin, not its interactions in the human body.
But there were various research articles attached to the reports, which included research into insulin, its effects, etc. Weren't you familiar with those?
Yes, there are references attached to my report that talk generically. I don't believe there were actual studies. There are lists, there are references to some studies, but those are not studies that I understood as interacting in a human body.
Well, why did you research them then?
There are references.
Why did you refer to them, and why did you say you were familiar with them?
If I'm understanding correctly, there's two sources of information that came out of the references that I provided. One was drugs.com, which is a site that we use for generic uses of drugs. And the other one was the Merck Index. And the Merck Index was provided for some of these to show generically what these are used for. And those references may be included in those studies in this pronounced.
And the Merck Index and those studies tell you how they work in the body, right? How their chemicals work, right?
The references that are included may provide that information, but those are not studies that they're within my scope of expertise.
Permission to mark this exhibit for identification purposes?
All right, if you'll hand it to the clerk, please.
This will be Defendant's Exhibit number 9.
approach the witness, Your Honor?
Yes.
Permission to question the witness from here,
You
Your
may
Honor.
proceed.
Thank you. Now, Mr. Stevens, would you look at those collection of photographs?
Sure.
How many photographs are there?
There are 4 photographs of what appear to be a vial in different positions.
Okay. I'm going to go through them one by one, if that's all right. The top one, would it be a fair representation to say this is a photograph of Humalog insulin Liz Pro vial? It's marked U100. The bottom it says Lily, and it has a fairly clear liquid that appears to be full to the top. Would that be correct?
This is a picture of a Humalog insulin bottle, Insulin Liz Pro, marked Lily. It's hard to tell from the image. That's the collar of the vial, so it does look like there's a liquid there, but it could be a bubble as well. This material is a bubble. So without having seen this, I don't know. I didn't take this picture.
Well, I would submit to you that this photograph was taken by Lieutenant Bledsoe and another officer at the location of 433 4H Lake Road, and it was placed on a counter and photographed. Okay? Does this look like the same vial that was submitted to you for analysis?
The front of this has the same markings. I would want to check with State's Exhibit 14 to make sure they have the same serials. And it's not possible to tell different lots. If they're the same lot of vials, it wouldn't be possible to determine if this vial and this vial were actually the same
Okay.
from pictures alone.
The second photograph is a side view of what appears to be the same vial. Isn't that correct?
Yes, this is a picture of another vial, or the same vial, if that's what you're telling me.
Right. And again, as far as what it shows, is it appears to be filled to the top, or, as you said, possibly a bubble, correct?
From the picture alone, I can't determine where the liquid is. There's a label that covers the vast majority of the bottle, and then at the very top, around where the collar of the vial is, there's a circle, and that could be liquid or it could be a bubble.
Okay. You know, I'd like to put these on the viewer so the jury can see as well.
Go ahead.
Now, Mr. Stevens, if you look at this viewer, and I don't know if you can see it or not,
Okay.
this is the first photograph I showed you, which was identified as Humalog Insulin Liz Pro. Is that right?
Correct.
And as you can see from this photograph, it appears as if the fluid comes all the way up to here on the bottom. Would that not be a fair and accurate representation?
Your Honor, the state objects. This is way outside of this witness's expertise. The picture is what the picture is, but it has nothing to do with forensic chemistry.
Your Honor, it does in the sense that we are documenting what he received, what condition it was in, and how it was analyzed.
I'm not sure the witness can answer, but I'll give the defense some latitude. If you can answer, Mr. Stevens, go ahead.
So as I previously testified to, it does look like there is some material up there at the top, much like you see now with States Exhibit 15. There are bubbles, and so from this picture alone, I can't ascertain whether that's liquid or a bubble, or just the color of the vial. So I can't answer the question accurately from this picture alone.
This second photograph is, or appears to be, the same vial from a side view. Would that be fair?
No, I refer to States Exhibit 14. to
Sure.
Check some of the markings. Yes, this has the same markings as States Exhibit 14.
Right, it has the numbers on the side, which are identical to the state's exhibit.
Correct.
Would you look at this photograph? Does this appear to be the same vial with the same contents viewed from the other side? And I call attention to these markings on the side, WG4171AMX. Is that the same vial as the state's?
This picture has the same markings as the vial from the state. I don't know if it's the same vial. Same markings.
Appears to be the same.
It has the same markings.
Yeah. I submit to you that, as I said, this vial was recovered and photographed by Lieutenant Bledsoe, who also stated in his report when he submitted these vials for analysis that this particular vial appeared to be full and unopened. Can you comment on that?
This is the first time I've heard that information. So I have no opinion, and it doesn't change my conclusion that item 15 is consistent with containing insulin, human insulin / Lispro.
And just for clarification, this last photograph, which was in this batch, again was photographed by Lieutenant Bledsoe as he found it allegedly in Natalie Cochran's refrigerator at 433 4H Lake Road. Does that information give you any other information or impact your analysis?
No, it does not.
Okay, thank you. Move for admission, Your Honor.
Any objection, Mr. Truman?
None.
Very well. What exhibits again are presented, Madam Clerk?
These 4 photos, number 9.
Collectively marked as number 9,
Yes.
they will be admitted.
Now, I know you're not an endocrinologist, but in order for synthetic insulin to be used, it has to either be injected directly with a hypodermic needle, or it has to be put into a pump worn by an individual for its use in the body. Isn't that correct?
I'm not familiar with the methods of application, if you will, the routes of entry that the drug would, but those sound like things that I've heard in general media. In other words, I don't know how the drug is best administered into the body.
In the reports provided, Humalog Lispro, once the top is punctured, has to be used within 28 days or its potency disappears. As a chemist, isn't that correct?
No, that can't be correct. In our case, we use standards for a period of time. So when we puncture them and we use them, we can still use them up until they no longer meet our quality criteria. From a medical perspective, that may be the case. But from an analytical chemistry, can we detect this? The answer is we can detect after something has been punctured more than 28 days.
You can't determine the potency of the drug as far as a time period. You didn't do any tests for the potency of the drug.
Correct. We do not test for concentration or potency as part of our routine analysis. So no, we did not test the potency of the drug.
But there were reports attached to your report and other reports from the FBI that once the top of Humalog insulin vial is punctured, the contents degrade over a period of time as far as usefulness in the body. Isn't that correct?
When I tested the sample that was submitted, States Exhibit 15, I compared it to fresh insulin obtained from a pharmacy, and they compared favorably. In other words, the ratios that we look at and the retention times that we look at were all consistent, and hence the conclusion. States Exhibit 15 is consistent with containing human insulin / Humalog at the time I analyzed it.
Okay. Now that brings up another point. To analyze the contents of this vial, marked Humalog, and give me just a moment. You or someone in your lab went out and got a new bottle of Humalog from Dan's Wellness Pharmacy for comparison, correct?
Correct.
And you did various tests on that bottle and compared it to the bottle that was submitted to you, all kinds of tests, and you found it was consistent with Humalog Lispro insulin, correct?
The report wording is consistent with consistent with human insulin / Humalog. Yes.
Consistent with means it is not identical, but it is of the same family. It appears to be the same type of drug, right?
Consistent with is the predefined highest level of association that we have in that standard operating procedure. So there is no identification of insulin in our lab. It's not a possibility.
Now, synthetic insulin is produced by the companies in batches. What I mean is the sum total of all synthetic insulin isn't produced by the manufacturer at the same time. It's done in batches of insulin. Isn't that correct?
Yes, insulin would be manufactured in lots or batches, yes.
Now, it has been put forth or alleged that a vial of Humalog Lispro insulin was provided to Natalie Cochran on or about February 6th of 2019. There is no possible way to say that particular vial is the particular vial that was analyzed by you. Isn't that correct?
I want to make sure I understand your question. You're asking, is the item submitted to me the vial that was collected, or are you asking if I can tie the vial that I tested to the one you described?
I'll ask it a little clearer. And I want to make sure I don't misstate anything. There have been some suggestions, implications that a vial of Humalog Lispro insulin might have been used by Natalie Cochran to inject her husband, and that vial may have been provided by the Davises, who had a son with diabetes. You don't have any way of determining if that was true, that vial was the vial you were provided in 21, which was recovered 4 or 5 months after the death of Michael Cochran. Wouldn't that
My
be true?
analysis would not link insulin to any incident. It only tests the contents of the vial. In other words, I don't know that any alleged activities happened out of this vial.
Okay. Why didn't you measure the volume of the vial?
At the time it was submitted, it was not in question, and that's not part of our technical operating procedure. That's not a requirement. That's not something that we were asked to do at the time, and it's not something that we actually have a procedure to do.
Why not? Wouldn't that be the first thing you would want to know to determine if any of the fluid was taken out?
Your Honor, this is beyond the witness's scope. He says this is our procedure. He followed the procedure. The defense hypothetical as to why is irrelevant.
I think we're getting far afield. The court is going to sustain the objection.
You don't know if any fluid was taken out of this vial or not.
That is correct.
Now it's been set forth that there was a puncture in the top of this vial. Is that correct?
That's outside my scope of expertise. There's a different examiner that examined that.
But you examined the bottle when it came in, did you not?
I did visually examine the bottle, but it's outside my area of expertise to determine if any markings on there are a result of a tool, like a needle or a syringe.
I didn't ask you about markings. I actually asked you about it has like a rubber top. In order to use it, someone has to use a needle to put it in to withdraw the substance. Is that correct?
Yes, that's the primary way that a user at home would use insulin.
And if there was a puncture in the top of that rubber seal, did you observe that when you looked at the bottle? I'm not talking about markings, I'm talking about a puncture in the top.
I captured images, States Exhibit 16, that include an image of the top of that, but I do not have an opinion on whether or not that's a puncture.
Okay. There were no fingerprints on the bottle. Is that correct?
It's outside my area of expertise.
Well, who examines the bottle when it comes in to determine if they're fingerprints or not?
In this case, I believe it went to our latent prints operating unit, which they would be the ones that would issue reports on that.
Okay. Did you review any of those reports or look at any of them?
I do not.
Now, I know it's not your area of expertise, but if the top was punctured, there would be no way to determine when that occurred.
Objection.
Sustained.
Okay. A moment, Your Honor. I'd like to look over my notes.
All right.
If the contents of the vial submitted to you and were tested and they were the same or consistent with a brand new bottle of Humalog insulin, which you did, you compared it, how could if the bottle were punctured 2 years earlier, how would the contents compare? Would not the contents of the vial you were given be different as far as degrading?
We didn't conduct concentration studies. We didn't conduct potency studies. These are, again, outside the scope of our technical expertise, our technical procedures. Sorry.
Last time, Your Honor.
All right.
I believe that concludes my cross-examination, Your Honor.
Very well. Redirect Mr. Truman.
State has no additional questions, Your Honor. Thank you.
Any reason to hold this gentleman further?
None.
Anything further from Mr. Stevens? Mr. Selden?
I don't believe so. I believe he can be excused.
Thank you, Mr. Stevens. You may step down. You are excused.
Thank you.
Come up, please.